Okay, folks, welcome to the October 17th, 2024 meeting of the Energy Working Group, where we're mainly energy committee members who are trying to educate each other on what our energy committees are doing in New Hampshire. And today we have Sarah Brock from Clean Energy New Hampshire, who's going to talk to us about direct pay, which is something about the government giving us money if we go through a lot of paperwork. That's the sum total of my knowledge of direct pay. So I'm handing it over to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Um, I would love to see a show of hands if you're able to turn your camera on, of 0 to 5 of where you fall on the spectrum of on Mary Beth's side of I think it means money, but like I really don't know, all the way to like I am an expert on this call on direct pay. Where are you?
And what's the high and what's
High
low?
5, like I am so on it, and fist is I'm starting from scratch here.
So
Okay, I'm seeing 2s and 3s. I'm seeing some fists, Bob,
great.
a couple ones. Okay, fantastic. That's really helpful. What we are going to do today, and thank you. I see at least Lenore is a 5. That's great. Those of you who are feeling like you're on the 5 side of the spectrum, toward the end of this call, and I see Rebecca Owens as well from Lebanon, you are going to be as useful as me in all of us sort of coming together to compare notes on what this is and how we can help each other. Those of you on the 0, 1, and 2, and I'm going to try to provide some context at the beginning of the call to bring us all up to like a level 2 or 3, and then we'll help each other. So the idea here is to give you a sense of what direct pay is, bring us all up to a basic understanding, show you what some of the resources look like that can give you a whole lot more information, and then talk to each other about what questions we have. Maybe we can answer those questions for each other. Maybe we can identify some questions that none of us know the answers to. And my team is certainly happy to play point on trying to get answers. And this is going to be something that this group and other groups of local energy project champions are going to have to keep coming back to, because as you'll discover in a minute when I go through this money conceptually is available for the next 10 years. And we're all going to touch it at some point. So let me give a quick what the heck is direct pay to get us started. But before I do, anything else anyone wants to throw out in terms of framing and what we should be doing today? Otherwise, I'll charge ahead. Okay, great. So I'm throwing in the chat a link to a Google Doc that is label it for you. Hold on. That is a direct pay guide that my team at Clean Energy New Hampshire put together. By way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, I am Sarah Brock. I work at Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit. I am based in Concord, and I have staff members based around the state, some of whom are here today, including Frank Richter, Melissa Elander. I think that's maybe it for my team today, who do direct technical assistance to municipalities in particular regions of the state, especially the North Country, Seacoast, and Southwest. And we put together this guide to direct pay, or elective pay as it's officially called, back in January when we started getting a lot of questions. And we do keep it relatively updated and are happy to continue to be sort of a go-to resource on this, even though we do not consider ourselves to be experts really in any way, but we tend to get the questions, and we tend to be the ones with the capacity to hunt for answers. So that's us. This guide, if you're looking at it, and I will go ahead and share my screen as well, just so I can show you what I'm looking at as I show you some of the pieces here. Share my screen. All right. So this is, if you clicked in, this is what you will be seeing too. There's a clickable table of contents to zoom around to the various sections. I'm not going to read this top to bottom for you. The high level piece is this overview paragraph. Effectively, as of about last year, the Inflation Reduction Act included money that allows tax exempt entities to get federal tax credits for renewable energy related tax credits. There's a whole list of what kinds of projects are eligible. We can go into that if you're interested, but the gist is generating electricity, whether that be solar, wind, battery storage for storing that electricity, electric vehicles and charging. So those sorts of things are covered. As many of you would know, if you own a small business or own a home, there had been for many years a 30% tax credit for solar. That's sort of the most commonly known tax credit of this kind. And this Inflation Reduction Act effectively just extended what already existed for tax-paying entities to tax-exempt entities. So nonprofits, municipalities, schools, anyone that didn't pay taxes before can take advantage of this, which is great. The amount for the kinds of projects that most of us will be touching is that 30%. So a municipal solar project can get a 30% tax credit. A battery storage project can get a 30% tax credit. There's a lot of fine print around the particular tax credits and who's eligible, but the very, very high level for what you need to know to start into this is that for most projects of the scale that our communities would be going after, it's a 30% type of tax credit is going to be most common, and it's for those, most commonly for electric vehicle infrastructure, electric vehicles, and energy generation. So that's the very, very, very high level. The process to get this money involves completing the project first. So if you're talking about a solar project, which is probably the most common for our purpose, you have to have that solar project interconnected and actually producing energy. After that, you can pre-file or pre-filing registration is what they call it. You have to tell the IRS that you have a completed project and give them some information about it. And they will take that and then give you a number. And using that number, you fill out tax forms, which for your town is going to feel really sort of overwhelming because they've never filled out tax forms before. And we have a number of towns that are in that process right now of, for the very first time, having to fill out tax forms. The dates in which this money is relevant starts back in 2023. So for communities, and some of you are on this call and are in the middle of this, for communities that had projects that were interconnected or completed and starting the beginning of 2023, we're eligible for this. So we do have communities in the state that we are tracking who pre-filed in early 2024 and are now in the process of filing tax forms with their accountants and with their finance staff to send that to the IRS. And then the IRS, once they receive that, conceptually is going to be sending an electronic transfer or a check to the town for the amount of that money. That's why it's nicknamed direct pay. The official name of the program is elective pay, but most people call it direct pay because it's the IRS giving your town, your nonprofit, a direct payment for the amount of what would otherwise have been a tax credit. There's no upper cap. You can go after as many of these as you want for as many projects as you want. There's a lot of money set aside for it, and it's meant to be something that continues all the way through this decade. So when I said we would all touch it at one point, that's because I would hope and presume that you're on this call because you're on an energy committee or you work with a town and you're trying to do energy projects. It would shock me if you don't need to go through this process at some point because it's not competitive. It's just you file, you get the money, which is, as Mary Beth implied, it's a lot of paperwork and a bit of a headache, but it's a good deal. So that's your extremely high level. I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if there are any very high level questions before I dig in to show you some of the pieces that you'll need to be aware of and where to go to get more information. Yeah, Beth.
Are there any concerns that it's going to go away depending on the results of the election?
I honestly don't know how to speak to that, mainly because most of the folks I work with are not really wanting to think that far ahead or cross that bridge until we get there, but not immediately. Possible that the timeline could shorten, but for the near term, it would be difficult to just grind that to a full halt.
Yeah, I mean, it's just if you go through all this and you get it up and running and then, find out you can get it. That would be a real bummer.
With programs like this, it is unlike it, they typically ramp it down in the future. So to avoid a situation like what you're talking about, it would be unlikely that there would be a hard stop. It would be more likely that there would be some grandfathering and feathering to a close so that folks that had developed projects with this intention in mind would not be left out to dry.
Hmm.
That is the typical way of things. I cannot promise. I see Zeke's hand is up.
Yeah, you may be talking about this later, but is there a one-to-one from the essentially the IRA rebates to what this program now supports, or is it more nuanced and specific to the program, right? Like you said, the 30% solar
Yeah.
and batteries, right? But what about like geothermal? Is that also the 30%? What about literally all the other ones, right?
There's a lot of detail when you dig under the surface. So I would say I'm not going to answer the specific geothermal question, just to say that it is helpful to understand going in the rough scope, but obviously to your point, you would want, ooh, I don't know what that is, but that's fancy. Obviously, to your point, you would want to have a project in mind and dive in because there are I can get into the details later. There's different kinds. There's getting payment for production. There's getting a lump sum tax credit on the full cost of the technology. There are thresholds over which, at a certain scale of a project, you might have to meet certain, American made or apprenticeship requirements in order to achieve the full 30%. So there's a whole lot of fine print. But on this call, we're mostly talking about folks trying to understand the basics. And the basics typically will be a solar project or, an EV charger for a town. And that will almost always be a relatively basic path to a 30% tax credit.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the high level question was really, is it a blanket one-to-one from the residential IRA, or are there details? And it sounds like there are
There's
details.
details. Oh yeah, there's more details than you would wish. But part of what I'll do in a minute is show you where to get helpful information to navigate those details because it's a lot.
So
Awesome.
if we're getting some bids now, do we requirements like the Davis-Bacon Act and salary payments, that all comes into play in this, doesn't it?
It does. For your case, because you're talking about a municipal solar project, that incentive, and this is where you will want to dive into the fine print to make sure you can give your town confidence. But for example, with the solar, the project has to be $1 million or more before it triggers it's either $1 million or 1 megawatt. I'm sorry, my brain's a little fuzzy on that. I haven't read that recently. But at any rate, the scale of your project will not come close to the trigger of having to meet BABA or apprenticeship requirements. But that can be different for the different incentives. So you have to make sure you've read that fine print. We are working with a couple of towns and with one of the agencies that I'm going to point you to in a minute here to come up with language that you ought to be presenting to your contractors when you put out an RFP and or when you contract with them to let them know you're planning to go after elective pay and ensure that they have read the fine print as well, so that they're giving you contracts and bids that include the kind of paperwork that you will need when you're filing, a year from now. Okay.
Yeah, that's key, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So, barring any other high-level questions, why don't I show you a bit of what the resources look like to help you navigate this? Important to know at a conceptual level that it's worth you looking into this if you are considering an energy project. And then pretty quickly, if you're thinking about a specific project, you'll end up diving sort of deep into the weeds and you'll need to know how to not get lost. So with that in mind, this resource, and let me share my screen again briefly so I can show you what's here. So I shared the high level overview with you. There's a little helpful links section here. The best resource, and I will show you what this looks like here in a couple of minutes, is from the Lawyers for Good Government. They provide pro bono legal assistance, and we've had a number of municipalities in New Hampshire use them both for their very good free print guides and also for their free technical assistance, which they have been willing to provide for municipalities. There's an intake form on their website. So I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Let me make this slightly bigger for you. There's some links here for finding information directly from the federal government. This is a federal government program, so that can be helpful. There is an FAQ that the IRS maintains, which is pretty robust. And there's this is where you would find the list of available tax credits, for example. And just out of curiosity, when I do this, are you still seeing my previous screen, or are you now seeing an IRS PDF?
IRS.
Great.
IRS.
Just curious whether the screen share would follow me. So you can see, and I'll show you here. I mean, this language is not the most helpful, but this is where we start to dig into the detail that you were talking about, Zeke, where for each of the credits, there are like a slightly variant version of what the credit is. And all of this is just below the surface. There's also a couple of other guides that are not quite as good as the Lawyer for Good Government guide, but still worth linking to here. There's various video tutorials and other things. So at the point at which you're really digging in, there's plenty here for you to absorb. There's also a good section here about where to go with questions, and this is really important. Most towns have a financial auditor, and we are finding that some of those folks are already assisting towns with this and are willing to. Some of them are saying, yeah, no, thanks, I don't want to touch it, but it's worth finding out who your financial auditor is and raising this sort of as soon as you think you might be doing it to see if they can help you. My team is also starting to talk with some of those folks to learn from their end what their experience is and if they're willing to be recommended to folks like you. And as we discover lists of financial auditors and support folks who are willing to work with municipalities specifically on one-off direct pay situations, we'll include them in this guide, but there are none listed so far. There's also a direct email to the IRS that I recommend you using. I have heard both instances, both towns reporting that they emailed and had a response immediately and then got a phone call the next day. I've also heard folks say that they sent something into the ether and never really heard back. But the point is, real humans are checking that address, and we are getting enough folks saying that they're getting responses that it is worth, if you have a question, just contacting the IRS. And I know you might not otherwise have thought to do that. Lawyers for Good Government, I already mentioned, but they do have a form online where you can submit specific questions and they will assign someone to talk with you. And that is very helpful because those are pro bono lawyers with training specifically in this. We have, since Senator Shaheen's office, some folks who very much want to be helpful. They are not experts themselves, but to the extent to which you might be struggling to get an answer from the IRS or having trouble navigating things, you are welcome to reach out to Elizabeth McKenna. We do have some towns who have looked at hiring a private consultant to be a project manager for this sort of thing. And if you're curious about that or you have someone you've used, I would love to know. We're going to, again, try to have lists of folks who are willing to help for a fee. And then finally, my team is always available. We are not experts in this, but we are happy to help you get unstuck and be the, deposit of information and resources place. And we will be keeping this guide up to date. It's just a Google Doc, but we would love to know your experiences so we can make this guide better. And then I won't go through the step-by-step pieces, but there is a relatively good, here's what needs to happen, here's the timeline. And if folks have questions about timeline, we can certainly get into that later. But let me skim through that for now and get to tax credits, common tax credits that you might end up touching because this was raised. For example, we have the Section 48 investment tax credit. That's probably currently the most common that I see folks going after. It can cover things like solar, battery storage, microgrids, geothermal heat pumps. So Zeke, to your point, that all falls under the Section 48. And this is the default of 30% of the cost of the property. There's a whole list of bonuses. I mentioned that domestic content is not a requirement. It is available as a bonus if you can work with a contractor and meet their domestic contract content guidelines. You could conceptually make that a 40% tax credit. We don't really have energy communities in New Hampshire, so that's not something that New Hampshire communities are going after. And I've not worked with anyone yet who's trying to go after the low income community adder piece, but conceptually that is available. And then down here, you can see that prevailing wage and apprenticeship piece that I mentioned is a requirement, but only for projects, and it was 1 megawatt, not $1 million.
Oh, that's good because I think ours is going to be over.
I know. As soon as I said it, I thought I am crossing my wires here. So anything smaller than 1 megawatt will automatically be the 30%. So this is an example of what the fine print looks like. There's a whole lot of links in here that help you dive deeper, and the resource I'll share in a minute also has some very good information.
Sarah, just one point I wanted to make. It's a detail, and we can probably talk about it after if there's time. But for the domestic content, is that referring to BABA?
Yeah, I believe it is.
Okay. Yeah, because
I'm curious about too.
we're going through a municipal solar project right now through the grant, the DOE grant. And one of the things we found out is that it's nearly impossible to qualify for BABA.
That is true.
However, literally weeks ago, we found out that there is a way to get 100% American-made installed solar that would qualify. We had no idea that there was an extra 10% though. We were just.
What I would say is I have not yet done the analysis myself to overlay what the IRS says about domestic content with what BABA says. It may be that it's the same. It may be that there's like fine print differences. So I would say if you have a situation where you're looking to go after this, do the deep dive on there and report back. I'd be curious to see what you found. Fine, but we have not had anyone try to look into it yet.
Definitely will.
Yeah. Okay. There is a electric vehicle purchasing credit. That's another relatively common. And again, the basic incentive is this up to 30% the cost of purchasing the vehicle. And then they do have some maximum incentives here, which are worth noting. That's the fine print there. And then there's EV charging credits as well. And this one is a 6% of the cost of the property and up to 30% if prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. I did not note on here whether there was some, threshold like with the solar, but I think if it's not here, it's probably because I couldn't find it yet. But that's one where if you are looking at EV charging, you would want to be looking at how to make sure that you can get that 30%. And I need to do some more digging to remind myself of whether municipal projects are likely to be exempt from defaulting to the 6%.
Do school buses fall into that vehicle category?
I believe that they do. You can see here that medium or heavy duty vehicle that would fall into that. There's some other funding through the EPA for school buses that would complement something like this, but yes, even farm equipment if you have a municipal farm. All right, so I am going to skip, pardon the fast scrolling, to see if there's anything else to show you here before I jump to. There's some good FAQs out there, both the IRS and Lawyers for Good Government. That's just good for you to know if you come up with a specific question. It's helpful to look through those. And then at the bottom, and this section will expand, we are trying to gather what we're learning as New Hampshire towns go through this. So please be in touch if you start going down, like if Zeke starts going down this rabbit hole to try to figure out if they can get the extra 10% for domestic content. I very much want to know how that goes, and we will include some notes in this lessons learned from New Hampshire's section and just try to make sure that we've got folks learning from each other. So I'm going to pause there and show you this Lawyers for Good Government resource so you have a sense of how to navigate that, because I would recommend for most, that's a good place to start. Before I do that, any questions or notes in the meantime?
I had a question. So with the domestic content, if you have a solar array and a battery backup and one of them has domestic content and the other doesn't,
Mhm.
does the whole thing qualify, or just is it just a certain percentage of content, or
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I have not yet worked with a town that has a compound project like that. And I'm frankly not sure how the IRS would treat that, if it would treat it as two separate rebates or as a single project. And if it was a single project, I think that it probably wouldn't qualify. But if it was treated as two separate projects and the one was, I could imagine that working. But
Hmm.
this is new. I've not. That would be a very good, if you ended up down that road, that would be the sort of thing to reach out directly to the IRS about how they want to handle projects that have multiple components.
Sarah, I saw that geothermal heat pumps are in there. Are regular air source heat pumps? No.
No, they're not. Yeah, I had that question earlier this week too. Okay. So let me show you what this Lawyers for Good Government site looks like. I am going to, and if you're following along, you can go back to the link I shared and you can jump down to the helpful links and click in yourself if you're the kind of person that likes to control your own destiny. Otherwise, I'm going to share my screen for you in just a moment. Okay. So Lawyers for Good Government since early 2024 has had this landing page. It's linked in our guide. It's also, you could just Google it, and they always put an updated date, and whenever I log in, it's been updated within the last week or two. So they're in here very frequently. They often will put the word new. Let's see if I can find an example for you. Yeah, they will often put the word new in front of things that are new. So if you are checking back regularly, that can be a way to see. They just recently introduced this, what they're calling the Clean Energy Tax Navigator, which is a way to a little bit more more user-friendly way to get into their resources. So I'll show you what that looks like. But effectively, this page is just a really long list of fairly well-organized links. And just briefly for you, they tend to have, and let's see if they don't have a table of contents. Feel free to scan it. They tend to have lists of when the IRS has office hours, so that they can be a good place to go if you're trying to figure out what, and the IRS does have office hours relatively frequently on this, which can be good to hop in and get live feedback. And they have annotated tax forms if you get far enough in the process that you're actually submitting forms to the IRS. They've got very good guidance on that. That's in free, like, viewable form, among other things. So let me take you in here. If you were to go into this navigator, it asks what kind of project you're doing, and you would click on one. I just chose solar, and then it asks you for your name. As far as I can tell, I'm not sure what they do with this, but it doesn't really seem to matter. I'm guessing they're just collecting data on their end. And if you were doing this as an energy committee, you would just say, like, Swanson Energy Committee or what have you. And then it asks you to name your project, and I have been naming things like test when I go in here to play around, and that is fine. And then once you're in, oh, problem with my submission. Oh, because I already did that. We'll try test 2. Hold on, sorry. It's being very clever. I'm gonna do New Hampshire Network then and see if that does it. There we go. So once you're in, it asks you some questions on the left, and on the right, it starts popping up suggestions of where to go in their resources to find information. I am finding that most of the things that pop up on the right also appear in that first web page with all the long links. But this is just kind of sort of a a more hold your hand way to get to what you're looking for. So you can do either way, but it's helpful to know this exists. In this case, we can say that we are working with a municipal utility. No. Tell me when you see a local government. There we go. And you can sort of tell it where you're at roughly in the project. I'm going to tell it that I don't have a specific project planned, but I'm going to use it as an example. And I may need help, and you just, click whatever makes sense. You will ultimately get to a page that looks like this, and this is where I have found that the help starts to come into play. When I click, for example, on pre-filing registration as something I need help with, you can see this little box pops up and it says, here's where to find the resources on pre-filing. And if I were to click on that, in this case, it is taking me to this page where I can get pre-registration information. I can see the annotated tax forms. I can see e-filing guidance. And if I really just want pre-registration, it actually just takes me, I think, right back to their main page, to the section where they have all their links. So you could have just scrolled down, but here, if you did use the interface, you would see. And they've got videos here, and they've got a guide with screenshots that's very, very helpful, that comes from the IRS. So I have found that they do a good job of curating the best available resource for the thing. Similarly, if you are looking for whether like the bonus adders, they have a fact sheet on bonus adders that gives more information about the 10% for energy communities, etc. So this one would be a good starter place for you, for example, Zeke. Domestic content, they do say here that they say AKA Buy America, which sort of implies to me that it is BABA. And it goes into some detail, which is helpful. So I would recommend, if you are at the phase of wanting to dive deeper, start with this, explore the little side boxes. It does tend to take you to the webinar or the fact sheet or the IRS guidance that is most relevant. If you don't want to futz with this little form interface, you can trust that the links you want are probably on, let's see if I can find it again, on this page. You just have to sort of patiently plod your way through. And I think I will leave it there for a moment, because we can dive in if any of us have specific questions and want to see if the tools can help. But I wanted just to make sure that you felt confident enough to be willing to go and check this out. Because I think for most of us, it will get us, 80%. And then we may have to come back and ask for specific help when you do hit a roadblock. So questions at this point?
Sarah, I didn't see any brownfield bonuses. Are there any?
Not that I'm aware of for this. You are right that there are brownfield bonuses for other things. And as I say that, I'm not confident I remember exactly what.
Sarah,
But don't take my word.
this is Rebecca Owens. It is, you actually can.
You can.
Yeah, it's under the energy community. It's under the, what's the one that's called community something bonus?
Oh, the energy community. Okay. That's good to know. I think one of the areas that I have not personally dug a lot into is that energy community piece. I do know that there's a map you can look at to see where the energy communities are in the United States, and we are not on that map as New Hampshire, but good point that there may be some other like exceptions if you're not on the map, but it's a brownfield site. So I'll flag that as something that my team needs to look at.
Yeah, the one time I tried to dig into it, I didn't find very good guidance, and I think that's where actually getting assistance from Lawyers for Good Government or similar entities can help, because everything's about the definitions and what applies, like this the EPA definition versus a different definition, and it's very nuanced.
Yeah, good point. Patsy.
Hi, Sarah. I was wondering if this is hypothetical, if you were to receive 100% of the cost in
Yeah.
donations and grants, are you going to be able to get the 30% back? And is there any difference between if you're a municipality and a nonprofit? I don't know if you're looking at nonprofits.
There shouldn't be a difference between municipalities and nonprofits. That's the easy part of the answer. With respect to the funding, we have looked into this. There is some fine print about how much they will cover. There's a community that I spoke with who had already raised money through private foundations for the project, then found out about direct pay, and they were unable to go after direct pay because the funds that they had were designated for that project and they could not redirect them. Had they been able to repurpose those funds, or had the funds been given with broader terms, they probably could have done that. So that's one thing to be aware of. In a case in which, and we have other communities looking at this, where maybe you have a grant that covers 80% of the project and you want to cover the remainder with direct pay, you will not be able to get 110% of that project cost. What the IRS requires you to file, in addition to the information about your project, is information about your other funding sources, and where there is funding that would otherwise push you beyond that 100%. If you were to get the full 30, it just automatically will only pay you out up to 100 and then stop. So that is built into the rules. Rebecca, go for it. I know you have more to add.
I don't know how much more, but so what Sarah was referring to with the community that already had funding, you want to work with unrestricted funds. So say you can establish a revolving energy fund in your community, or a green project fund. You don't want to have it tied to that one project, and that opens you up to being able to use basically the same money, with still get direct pay. And then there is it's going to sound large, but in the end, it's not worth not going after direct pay. But be careful where your funds come from, because if it's a municipal bond, municipal bonds are federally sourced, and they don't want you to double dip with direct pay and municipal bonds. So you get a 15% reduction on your total credit if you use municipal bonds. So say the project's going to get $30,000 back. If you don't have that, it would be 15% off of that 30,000.
Yep, absolutely. And the last time this group met, we did speak about setting up fund through, and if you're a town, through the town meeting, to have reserve funds set aside for energy projects that are broad enough in scope that you would not run into this issue of not being able to go after direct pay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm seeing some notes in the chat about what is an energy community. And so far, it seems like all of us have that question. And that should be one of the things on our list of collectively, we need to figure that out in case there's any way that any of our projects can benefit from that 10% adder. What are some other questions or experience so far? So I know some of you are in the middle of this, and I see Mary Beth is raising a hand.
What did you say? You saw a map or something where New Hampshire showed that we don't have any energy communities?
Yeah, I did. But as Rebecca alluded, every time I try to touch this, I get a little confused because there's a lot of different maps and it does not seem all that clear. But
okay.
Last time I looked into it, my impression was, wow, this is really meant for other parts of the country.
Okay.
Where there's a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure and power plants that have been shut down in communities that are like in the valley of an ex-coal plant. Like those are the kinds of communities that the DOE is calling energy communities. And we have Seabrook, but we don't really have that. Zeke.
Yeah, since we're at the point where I can get into more detail, I would
Go
like
for it.
to talk, yeah, I really want to talk about our experience with this solar project and BABA, because it was chance and we think it's going to work. And like I said, we had originally used it as a stronger point for our grant. So this is for the RFP, the municipal solar grant that closed over the summer. We're still waiting to hear back. I'm sure there are more people here waiting to hear back. But one of the things that we did to strengthen our grant was say that we were actually going to build a 100% American-made solar panel array. And the reason that that's possible, it's actually kind of unique, but it shouldn't be, in my opinion. So nowadays, most solar companies will use microinverters for the solar installations. It's just easier for them for other technical reasons. And that is over optimizers, which is the other way that people traditionally do solar arrays. The problem with microinverters is that the two biggest companies are Enphase and oh my God, I'm blanking on the other one, but both of them are made outside of the United States. So most of the times, solar companies don't even bother with BABA and they ask for the exemption if they're under 1 megawatt. However, if you go for optimizers, which is not a common thing for solar companies to want to do, but if you do, the common company for that is SolarEdge. And SolarEdge, traditionally an Israeli company, just announced that they're going to open a plant in like this month or next month in the United States that will 100% make inverters and optimizers, which closes the gap on being able to do a 100% American-made array, because with optimizers being American and inverters being American, then it's just a matter of sourcing racking, which is made in Texas. That one everyone gets, Iron Ridge, and then the solar panels themselves. But solar panels, we have more and more companies here in the US that will make them. So it is entirely possible. However, it is very early in the game because you need to have a project that starts in like February 2025, which of course is going to be a thing coming up. We will absolutely let you guys know if this works, because we are also, our installer is excited too, because he had no idea. And then he found out and was like, oh, this is going to change things for us. So yeah, that I think is going to be very cool, especially with the 10%. Even though for us, if we get the grant, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to apply for direct pay because they pay 100% anyways. But for a future one, for sure, we would go with this technology. And again, it's not a common way of doing this type of installation. So I wouldn't expect every solar company to say, oh yeah, absolutely, we can do this. But it might shift things for sure.
That's great. Do keep us posted. This is exactly the sort of peer-to-peer sharing that hopefully we can start doing more of in this setting. Yeah. Other bits of experience or questions about direct pay? I will say that some of what I'm hearing, and again, this is all secondhand, the talking to your town, especially the town administrator, the town finance person, about the fact that this exists and that it's something you're planning on going after really early is very, very important. Unfortunately, there will be a burden on your town staff to get through this. Some of the things that have been snags. One is just like education. We don't actually have any towns in New Hampshire that have received their payment from the IRS yet because this is so new. And I think we're all going to be hoping and waiting for that to happen soon so that we can go to our town administrators and say, this is real. The money does actually come. There's a bit of a, is this for real thing going on? There's also the pre-filing component requires an individual in the town to file and get, they use their personal government identifiers or social security number to get a sam.gov registration and a number, which can freak people out a little bit. So that is a thing. It's another reason to start the pre-filing as early as you can, because there's the convincing your people that it's real, there's the getting that darn number, and then there's the actual paperwork for the pre-file, which isn't it's not huge, but it's also a little bit of a pain in the butt. So you should do that sooner rather than later. So if you hit a snag, you have time to talk to the IRS or bring in a lawyer for good government type person and get that taken care of. There's also this year been a whole lot of willingness on the IRS's part to extend filing deadlines for tax exempt entities. There was an automatic 6-month extension given to municipalities without having to file a darn thing because they assumed that it would be quite a lift. Oh, thanks, Frank. They assumed it would be quite a lift, and it was, and they recently extended that to all tax exempt entities. That had to do with the fact that this was the first year for everyone, but I would expect that moving forward, and it's a relatively simple process, it is possible to request an extension if you're feeling like the time crunch is there. There's also just the matter of when you're going to town meeting or city council and asking for funds for projects, you're going to have to float this 30% for the whole period from getting the project installed to getting that money back, and it can be a while. And understanding the timeline that is applicable for you can be a little complicated. It ties to what the town's fiscal year is, and you have to do a little math and look at the sample calendars and try to understand, okay, so what exactly is my filing deadline? For most towns, it's something like May because it's 4.5 months after the end of their year, which you can opt for either a calendar year or to follow your fiscal year. But there's some like annoying little details there that you want to not be rushed in trying to figure out. So there's just a preview of some of the things that have been a little bit headachy for towns, and a reason to start reading up on this early and get your pre-filing work done sooner rather than later. There's really no reason to wait. And then we don't have a lot of examples of folks successfully filing yet. I know of a couple. I'm starting to hear of it being a bit annoying because the e-filing process is preferred, but not necessarily easy to get through. I noticed today on the Lawyers for Good Government site, they had just announced a partnership with some company that was offering a very discounted rate to help communities e-file that had everything else in order. So those sorts of things are out there. But I think once we have more towns that have been through the start to finish process, we'll have much more to share collectively about how to navigate the e-filing, where the snags are when it comes to filling out those forms and filing, how to get help. But the towns who are doing that are very much in the thick of it right now. So there's not a whole lot of learning to share.
You would think by now someone would have come up with an AI version of the tool. I mean, I'm serious. This is like just up the alley of what AI.
Give it a year or
LLMs can
two,
do.
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, they should be able to help us simplify things. I did have one other random question,
Yeah.
just because I've been, for lack of a better word, stress testing the IRS energy credits for years now.
Good for you.
Yeah, I get audited all the time because I do weird things, and it's like it always works out, thankfully for now. But one of the things that I was trying out recently was exploring the battery credit for EVs that do battery backup, vehicle to load or vehicle to grid. And there's a lot of confusion online. Nobody has tried it yet. I am definitely not going to try it. My tax advisor was against that one. But I don't know if anybody here has thought or considered it, because backup, so generators are a thing that it's difficult to get battery backup because it's so expensive if the only reason is for battery backup, right? In other states, when you're able to sell your energy, it's a lot more profitable, but here, like, the cost just doesn't make sense a lot of times. However, if you could couple it with, say, you can get someone in town an F-150 Lightning, and then, hey, it just so happens that you can also use it as battery backup. Then we were trying to explore that one. I don't know if anyone here has tried that or heard, or I'm definitely not going to go to the office hours now that I know that that's an option. But
So something that has come up, haven't gotten anywhere on it, but we have a town garage where they've been looking at solar for that. But the school buses also park in that area, so that synergy between the school bus batteries and the solar is something that we wanted to look at a little bit.
So far, I'm hearing that start to be talked about, but only in a conceptual, that makes a lot of sense. Gosh, I wonder how we could do that sense. And nobody who has figured out the logical path. But I've got some folks on my team, specifically Doug Cogan, who's not here, but he's the Sullivan County circuit rider, who is very interested in this. And gosh darn it, he's going to find a path when it exists. So we should all keep each other updated.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would say that you now know that this is a thing, You now know that you can reach out to me if you dare, knowing that we are not experts, but we do have this guide that we are trying to maintain, and we very much want to know all of your experiences. And we will keep in touch with all of you and the other energy committee folks we know around the state to track who's in what stage of the process and what you're running up against and what's been helpful. So just don't be a stranger on that point. And as I said, this is going to be something we probably circle back to numerous times in the coming years, because I think we will all hopefully end up getting some of this money for local projects, one way or the other.
Okay.
Oh, Susan's
Susan,
good.
were you raising your hand?
If you didn't put in your email, we'll have trouble contacting you.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
And
Thank you so much, Sarah.
thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and I did
Absolutely.
want to take a few minutes at the end to ask you folks who come here, what topics are you interested in for these monthly meetings? These have been really great, but we're just sort of making them up based on what's of interest to us. So if you could take a minute or two and put in the chat after your email, if you haven't already done so, what other topics are of interest to you, or do you think would be of interest to the various energy committees across the state?
Well, I have one if you haven't already covered it at some point or other. You did a fine job on the solar presentation. Do you have any information that either has been presented or might be presented about the whole wind farm turbine business?
Are you hoping Sarah or somebody has an answer? I'm thinking that might be a nice topic for us to ask around and find somebody who might be able to.
I think we should put that on our topics list. I can tell you that I'm not aware of any town energy types that are looking at wind, but we certainly could find someone to come talk and update the group of us on this, the state and opportunities for wind in New Hampshire.
Well,
that's not me.
The Energy Commission here in Plainfield has been looking into it.
Okay.
We've gone and toured a wind farm in Leominster and talked with them a little bit. And Cornish and Merritt and Plainfield are all fairly interested in it, but
okay,
we wanted to hear your take on it as well.
Yeah, that's great to know.
Okay, good. I'm seeing some good topics in the chat. Thank you very much.
And my daughter lives in Germany, and anytime you drive, you see every little acre of farmland has a wind turbine on it.
Yeah. Keep throwing ideas in the chat. I'm seeing some really good topics. And I'm glad, Lisa, thank you for mentioning the engaging townspeople in energy and electrification topics. Some of you may have been on the call yesterday, I think, with New Hampshire Department of Energy sort of unveiling what's coming with respect to heat pump and electrification and energy efficiency monies coming down through the home energy electrification rebate program and the home efficiency rebate program, which is, conceptually up to $14,000 for low-income households to help electrify, and how that's going to look in the state. And that's going to hit sometime next year. And I think there's a significant role for energy committees to understand those programs and to help make sure that they reach the residents that they are intended to reach, which will be low and moderate income residents, both renters and homeowners.
Lots of good questions. Yeah, next steps for community power. My town of Merrimack, we passed it last April, but we're still not using any of it. And people keep asking me, because I was one of the big proponents that put out signs and stuff like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, we're kind of waiting for the best prices or whatever to make things kick in. But yeah, that might be a good topic. All right.
Great. Well, thank you all. And thank you, Mary Beth and Susan, for hosting this forum. It means a lot to those of us working on the ground that we sometimes get to come together and compare notes. So thank you.
Thank you. So we'll meet again this time next month. In the meantime, there might be a network event about suing electric companies or fossil fuel companies. I think we've got someone from Conservation Law Foundation and maybe some other folks talking about the legal route. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for joining us
Bye.
today.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.